That's the cue. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Friday, the last day of M581. Also, probably the best day because it's Friday. We got a full day today. We've got several folks lined up. So, we'll try to get all this stuff in. Again, my name is Matt Hona. I work for the Oregon Department of Forestry out of Northeast Oregon. I'll be your facilitator today. And first up, we have Barb to talk about all hazard and emergency support function. Are you ready to go, Barb?
Yes, sir. I sure am. Thank you.
All right, take it away.
Thanks. Morning, everybody. Congrats to making it to day 5 of M581, and thanks for to the cadre actually for asking me back to talk about all hazard and particularly ESF4. Matt, I will ask you to kind of monitor the chat, etc. I would ask the students, some of the questions may seem rhetorical, but I'd love to engage folks. So please feel free to participate by asking questions or providing responses. I'd really appreciate it. So we'll go ahead and get started. Trying to go off video here, but it's not letting me. There we go. All right. Are you able to see the slide deck?
Not coming through quite yet.
Barb, it's not even indicating you're trying to share your screen.
Okay, well, I'll try again.
There it goes. It's coming up. We see your editing screen.
Got it?
Now we see your slides.
Good to
Excellent.
go.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I am the Assistant Director for Cooperative Fire, which kind of by default makes me the Regional ESF4 Coordinator. So for those of you who might be Forest Service in Pacific Northwest, if you know Ed Hyatt, he would be my counterpart. And been doing this probably, let's see, about 9 years working with ESF4. So first question is, how do you define all hazard? And I know it seems kind of a rhetorical question, maybe an obvious response, but you'd be surprised. A lot of folks, particularly like in wildland fire, don't think of wildland fire as an all hazard response, when it in fact is. So is there anybody who would like to take a stab at defining all hazard? No? Okay. We'll define it for you. So it is an incident, natural or man-made, that warrants action to protect life, property, environment, and public health or safety, and to minimize disruptions of government, social, or economic activities. So obviously it could be anything from a tropical storm, be a hurricane or a typhoon, to the significant wildfires we just experienced here in California. COVID, obviously, terrorist activities can be considered all hazard. So it does cut across every possible discipline that you can think of. So one thing I'd like you to remember is that all hazard responses are locally executed. They may become state managed and federally supported. And I try to emphasize the federally supported often throughout the presentation, because there is some thought that FEMA, when they come in to support or direct, that they take over, and it is not the case. FEMA will support the states when they ask for help. So it's up to the states really and the governors to request assistance and request specific assistance for whatever that particular incident might be. So if you want to check out your red book, in chapter 8, it identifies various authorities that allow us to participate in any disaster preparedness or response authorities. I'm not going to go through all of these for you, but you can certainly refer to the chapter. It does provide some good information in terms of our responsibilities. Specific agency authorities. So for us in the Forest Service, our Forest Service Manual 1500 with Chapter 1590 specifically addresses our emergency operations, and anybody in a DOI agency, their authorities are in the Emergency Operations Handbook, Department Manual 900. So pretty much the guiding document for us is the National Response Framework. Details of this, the framework are covered in the FEMA online course, which we all have to take, IS 800. And it is what it says, the framework or the foundation for our response to major emergencies or declared disasters. Emergency support functions were born out of this guidance, and the emergency support function, or ESF structure, is pretty much the model for mobilizing needed expertise to incidents. So how does it get applied? So as I mentioned before, majority of incidents are managed locally, and some will require additional support or mutual aid. A small number, in fact, of the incidents will require federal support. And as I mentioned before, the governor has to request that support either from other states, and we'll get into that a little bit more later, and from the federal government, or strictly from the federal government. In jurisdictions across the US, cities, counties, states, et cetera, they're employing concepts from the National Incident Management System and the National Response Plan to apply the NRF. And it's always in effect. And operational elements in the NRF, they can be partially implemented, they can be fully implemented. It's all about, like our wildfire incidents, it's scalability, right? Whatever we need, we scale up or down. As mentioned before, in most cases, the incidents are managed locally with existing resources. When there's a gap in local capability, we have mutual aid systems in place with nearby cities, counties, et cetera, to provide additional, whether it's engines, crews, ambulances, law enforcement, you name it, any other form of assistance. Most states in the US do have a tremendous level of capability with National Guard and other resources. But when the state anticipates a gap, they too have alternatives to coordinate. So I mentioned from other states, there is the Emergency Management Assistance Compact that states can use before they request federal assistance, or they can do it in concert with requesting the federal assistance. For example, state of Florida, they have a standing EMAC agreement with the state of North Carolina, which they may use to employ North Carolina National Guard C-130s to evacuate residents from the Keys when threatened by a hurricane. That's one thing that's been used quite often. As I mentioned earlier, in reality, only a small number of incidents do require federal support, and even fewer would be considered catastrophic, where the typical pull on federal resources from a state would be reversed to initiate a push of resources toward them. And I think, yeah, the framework, provides a coordinating mechanism. So we all work together with other ESFs. There are primary agencies and supporting agencies, which we'll learn about later. But it's a pretty good coordinating mechanism for sharing information as well as doing assessment and integrating federal support. So the National Response Framework leadership and coordination role. So a federal department or agency may act on its own authority as the initial federal responder in lieu of FEMA taking over. Can anybody think of where that might have occurred in the past few years, where a federal department actually took the lead on a program?
COVID.
Very good. Yeah. And so who was the lead for that initially?
I believe it started with HHS and then was transferred early on.
Yep. Very good. Exactly right. HHS and COVID. We did have a little bit of a railroad union scare. What was it? Maybe a couple years ago, year and a half ago, where we thought there may be a strike. Department of Transportation, it was considered not necessarily a disaster, but an emergent situation, and Department of Transportation took the lead on that. FEMA did support with a few, single resource types, if you will, to support the incident management team that DOT had in place. The lead for the federal government response effort technically is POTUS, so the President of the United States. But, of course, he or she wouldn't be the active manager to ensure that the necessary structures are in place. So the Homeland Security Council and National Security Council, which bring the cabinet officers and other departments or agency heads together as necessary, provide advice and counsel to the president during these large-scale incidents that affect the country. Federal agencies may assist consistent with their authorities and agreements. I addressed the authorities earlier. So depending on what the specific request is, USDA can participate in a variety of ways. DOI may participate in a variety of ways. HHS, as indicated before, all within their authorities, the various ESFs will contribute. As noted, when DHS coordination is required, the administrator coordinates the federal emergency management response, and Deanne Criswell is still currently the FEMA administrator, at least for the time being. And as mentioned before, FEMA does use the emergency support functions as their coordinating structure for federal support. Okay, so NIMS, ICS, FEMA, NWCG, et cetera, et cetera. So does anybody want to try to tell me the difference, what they think the difference is between ICS and NIMS? Or what kind of differentiates them?
Take a stab at it. ICS is specific to an incident, and NIMS is the system without an incident.
Yeah, I mean, what I consider it is NIMS is the overarching system, right? And ICS is how we implement it on the ground. That's the way I look at it. Would anybody argue with that?
Yeah, you don't really have a command structure until you implement ICS, so the command structure really isn't embedded in NIMS itself.
Correct. Very good. Yeah, and so, FEMA now owns ICS. I struggle with that ownership of ICS, but the standards, the forms, the training, et cetera, they oversee all of that. They establish ICS core competencies and qualification requirements. There's obviously discipline-specific qualification requirements that exist, such as, NWCG, and they, if they don't exist currently, they are being developed. Each discipline will have an endorsement process to formally recognize or not other discipline qualifications. We used to be the only game in town, and we're not the only game in town anymore. So, as most folks I think know, we do have a NIMS integration committee or work group. It's led by Steve Griffin out of the All Hazard branch in DC. And he works really closely with Hank Rowland out of FEMA on coordinating the whole kind of NWCG FEMA crossover. And they have worked quite a bit on endorsement processes to bring all hazard qualifications, not all of them, obviously, but to bring as many as possible to create a crossover to our wildfire qualifications. Okay, so FEMA directed federal assistance, typically done through IMATs, which are incident management assistance teams. And, I'll emphasize that they're not IMTs. Their organizational structure is similar, but they have a very different role. It's rather than overall management responsibility for an incident, it's support only. They're rapid, what they consider rapid response teams. They have subject matter experts and incident management professionals, and they analyze and execute disaster response as directed by the states. It's essentially advice and counsel to the states. They will support the initial establishment of a unified command with a state or multiple states, and will provide situational awareness for both the federal and state decision makers. And this, obviously that's crucial in determining the level and type of support that may be required. So IMATs are all FEMA personnel, but they may on occasion bring folks from various emergency support functions or other federal departments and agency staff, according to, their established protocols. There is what we call supplemental response teams now, where they may bring, a whole supplemental response team from a state or local agency that's not, involved in the incident, to plug and play for gaps in a federal IMAT. So, for example, there was an SRT that was put into place down in Puerto Rico a couple of years ago for one of the hurricanes. FEMA didn't have the capacity to flesh out an entire team, so they put a SRT team in place, and that was all done through ESF4. And so because of that, we had an ESF4 liaison also on the ground to coordinate between the IMAT as well as the SRT. Hope that makes sense. So FEMA organization, so you guys are Region 10, Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. I'm currently located in Region 9. In true federal style, we couldn't possibly align our regions with the other agencies, but it seems to work out so far. In my region, we also have Nevada and Arizona, which means I need to coordinate with Region 3 and Region 4 folks if there is something going on in Nevada and Arizona, but it works out pretty well. Okay, so our emergency support functions. Like I said before, primary mechanism for coordinating the mobilization. Federal government and many state governments, the ones with any capacity, like Texas, like Florida, California, etc., organize most of their resources and can also enlist the help of certain private sector and non-governmental organizations under the ESFs. The ESFs, as mentioned, are coordinated by FEMA through the National Response Coordination Center, primarily in DC, but most of the work is done at the regional level. There are multiple times where the NRCC might not necessarily even activate, and it will all be done at the regional level. So, for example, the recent fires in California, although they would be heavily involved behind the scenes, the NRCC was not stood up. It was done at the regional level completely with, a little bit of national support. Typically, when there is a hurricane and we're talking multiple states, which will end up being multiple regions, FEMA will then stand up NRCC because it takes a little bit more robust response. ESFs can be virtual. My role in the wildfires recently was entirely virtual, and I was the only one that was mobilized. It can be at the Regional Response Coordination Center, and ours is in Oakland, California. Yours is in, anybody remember where it is for Region 10 FEMA?
Bothell, Washington?
There you go. Yep, Bothell, Washington. So, might be enlisted to work there at the RRCC, or like they did pretty quickly for the California wildfires, they did open a joint field office in Pasadena, and ESFs could work out of there. So these are the current ESFs. ESF4 is firefighting, but you'll notice that when it comes to an actual wildfire disaster, as we just experienced and are still experiencing in California, our participation is not significant. It's mostly advice, counsel, providing essay, providing briefings, etc. But we still do all mobilization of fire resources through, normal channels through our national MOB system. There can often be confusion because folks on the ground are not aware of that. So they will submit requests to FEMA for particular fire resources, but in reality, it needs to get rerouted and just ordered through the national MOB system as you would normally do during a fire. Most of these ESFs are run by a federal agency, so transportation, pretty obvious. Public Works and Engineering, which is ESF3, really significant with providing generators. You would think that would be energy, but oftentimes Public Works is heavily involved in that. And does anybody know who oversees, who's the primary agency for Public Works for ESF3? It's actually in the name, engineering. So it's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They're the primary agency for ESF3, and probably do some of the heaviest lifting during our disasters. ESF5, which is called Emergency Management, it's essentially FEMA. FEMA oversees ESF5. Mass Care is also technically FEMA, but they lean heavily on American Red Cross for support in that. ESF7, also a FEMA directed ESF. We talked about HHS before, they're ESF8. ESF9, Search and Rescue, is coordinated by FEMA, but fully supported by a lot of our regional search and rescue. So it goes on down the line. FEMA also 14 and 15 will direct those, but the others are through various primary agencies. So we talked a little bit about this before, all hazard firefighting resources, we have mutual aid agreements, local operating plans that we work on. There are compacts. And then there's also ESF4 deployed resources. And as I mentioned before, it's through the National Fire Mob system. And anytime we have a firefighting resource that might be deployed through or for, let's say, a hurricane response. If they want to set up, let's say they want a short team to set up a logistical type situation, providing meals or water or what have you down the road, then they come to ESF4 and they submit a mission assignment and the request goes in, and then we go through the National Fire Mob system. If it's a wildfire, however, like I said before, they go directly through the National Fire Mob system. So EMAC that we talked about before is a governor-to-governor agreement. It's interstate mutual aid, provides expertise, services, and equipment to the requesting state. So when Hawaii had the wildfires on Maui and the Big Island a couple years ago, they obtained a lot of their resources through the EMAC. And, obviously it's not going to be engines or anything like that, but mostly personnel to come and support. They just didn't have the capacity to do it on their own. So they were requesting public information officers, or CAL FIRE sent a team over to support Maui's EOC. California also recently requested quite a few resources through their Emergency Management Assistance Compact, so direct from other states, when they had exhausted mutual aid here. So our responsibilities provide firefighting resources to do whatever kind of support that the state needs. As you know, during COVID, ESF4 was second only to the Department of Defense in providing resources to provide vaccinations in the vaccination campaign. We mobilized thousands of folks, a lot of retirees, a lot of folks who were signed on as ADs, as well as a lot of active federal employees who are medics or EMTs. So whatever the task is, we've done grid searching when we lost the shuttle. We've done emergency road clearing. We provide a lot of IMTs for logistical support, or probably to set up like not really a responder camp, but they'll oversee, let's say we have 10 crews on the ground that are doing emergency road clearing to support search and rescue. We'll then put an IMT in place that can manage the crews, ensure they're taken care of. We do a lot of training during the early days of COVID, when there are several states that just don't have the capacity in terms of their emergency management. We put people in EOCs at state and local levels to provide training, because we want to teach them to fish and not fish for them, right? So we go in for 2 weeks and develop plans for them so that they could kind of carry themselves forward. And of course, during disasters, we want to coordinate detection, suppression of fire. One of the other things that we do quite often is we'll do assessments on the ground locally after a disaster to see what their capabilities are in terms of fire. Are their local fire departments able to maintain an acceptable level of service? Are the fire stations damaged? How are the personnel doing? USFA gets involved in that to a degree, but we will also often put subject matter expertise or experts on the ground to do assessments of how folks are doing. So this is our priority list. Our agency response mission, actually, of course, is wildfire. Then our ESF4 mission under the National Response Framework, and I'll provide a link later so you can see that in detail. Then support to other ESFs as specified the National Response Framework. So if ESF3, with USACE, needs help on the ground with emergency road clearing, or if it's DOT, it can come from different agencies, then we will work directly for them as support to other ESFs. And then last but not least, non-specified support to other ESFs and departments and agencies. We try to abide by our authorities as best we can, but sometimes we're asked to do things that we don't really want to say no to, just to support the states and the people on the ground. So in a support role, we talked about this. More often than not, we're coordinating support from the various wildland fire agencies to other ESFs and agencies rather than actually doing the coordinating of the firefighting. And I hope that's clear because it, is described, or we're not in charge. We're just supporting. So coordination for ESF4 in particular, we have a national ESF4 coordinator in Washington, D.C., Gordy Sachs. He's our branch chief for all hazard and international fire support. Each region, each Forest Service region, that is, has an ESF4 coordinator. And as I mentioned earlier, there is some overlap with the various states. Gordy has to report up to USDA and to U.S. Forest Service leadership, and also works closely with the Emergency Support Function Leadership Group and the Disaster Response Group at FEMA. So lots of meetings and high-level discussions going on there. I am responsible to my leadership in the region, both the fire leadership as well as up to the regional forester. And then we also have quarterly meetings with the FEMA Regional Interagency Steering Committee to talk about, what's going on with our ESFs, or to discuss a new earthquake plan, you name it. So common assignments, we kind of talked about this earlier. We provide personnel, we provide command and control resources in support of any operations during the emergency. Oftentimes for communication support, we will be asked to provide radio kits out of the cache. So if it's not, PL5 or, 4, and we have the resources available, then we will certainly, deploy radio kits to the area that needs them. The road clearing I talked about earlier could be ESF3, could be, search and rescue. We can staff and manage, as I mentioned before, FEMA logistics facilities, and again, provide miscellaneous overhead positions to support FEMA, typically in planning, logistics, and aviation. We've provided, during 2017, when we got hit 3 hurricanes in a row, it was Harvey, Irma, and then Maria. We provided some, air ops folks down to Florida, and that was actually out of Texas Forest Service. So recent ESF4 activations, I'm not going to go through them, but just it gives you an idea of the different kinds of things. The presidential inauguration back in 21, Steve Goldman out of Region 9, his team was deployed. They worked hand in hand with kind of the medical folks during the inauguration. COVID-19, I mentioned before. So let's say you're an IMT and you get deployed. You know, this is a really good resource to have. We have not a letter of delegation necessarily like we would on a fire, but we have a letter of intent or expectation. And one of the things that we'll address is the all hazard response doctrine. And it's got, you know, the principles that have been established by our agency, by the Forest Service, to guide ESF4 actions. And that's not just our ESF4 leads, but also the teams that respond through ESF4. DOI did assist in the development of this doctrine and, you know, completely supports the principles. And it's also a key part of, I mentioned the Red Book, Chapter 8. Okay, so some other links and resources. I did check and these are still valid. I had to remove a couple because in the last year they've changed or we get the 404 alert. But these are really helpful for folks who, you know, may be deployed for various reasons. If, you know, we've sent, you know, F-bands and L-TANs out. We've sent, you know, public information officers out. We've sent out ops chiefs. We've sent out base camp managers. You name it, we've sent folks out. And if it's something that you're inclined to do or available to do, and it's not the heart of fire season, these are really good resources to give you an idea of how things work. And that's it. It's not as much information as I would like to give you, but it's a pretty good overview. And unless you have any questions, that's it for me.
Does anybody have any questions for Barb? There was there was a thing in the chat that just said ACOE, and there wasn't a question mark or anything, but I'm assuming that's an acronym for Army Corps of Engineers.
Correct. Got it, Matt.
But I didn't know if that was a question in the chat or if it was a statement in the chat. So
they were answering my question.
Oh,
So,
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So no questions for Barb?
Yeah. It just might let folks know that there is an all hazard component in 520 for those of you who might be inclined to take 520 and haven't already. We do teach an ESF4 course for federal folks. It's a 3-day course, 2-day of didactic or lecture actually, and then 1 day for simulation. So just so you're aware. So reach out to Ed and he can probably point you in the right direction if you're interested.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, I've got 8:55. We're scheduled for a break, so let's take a 10-minute break until 9:05.